Many people may not think who've traditionally been working in senior living for years, when we think about rehabilitation and therapies in senior living, maybe technology is not the first thing that comes to mind. With you heading up so much of the education for your organization, why is this so important to you all, and why should this be so important and exciting for the senior living industry?
Welcome to Season 6 of Bridge the Gap, a podcast dedicated to informing, educating, and influencing the future of housing and services for seniors. Powered by sponsors AccuShield, Inquire, Connected Living, Hamilton Captel, Refera, ServiceMaster, The Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity. The contributors are brought to you by Peak Senior Living and produced by Solinity Marketing.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap, the Senior Living Podcast. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm so excited to have guests with me today. Chris Brickler, MyndVR CEO, and a new partnership they have forged with Select Rehabilitation, Dr. Kathleen Weissberg, the National Director of Education. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I first want to start off, and many of our audience are very familiar with both of your companies, but many don't know that you all have formed a partnership over the past year, and there's so many exciting things going on between your companies and what you're doing for the senior living industry. Chris, can you tell our audience a little bit more about the why behind the partnership and what is happening?
Yeah, Josh, it's been a really great 2022. At the beginning of 2022, we did partner with Select after learning about sort of their progressive vision into therapy and especially technology and how technology is going to impact therapy over the course of the future. We went into a partnership in early 2022, trialed this out on a number of customers, got our teams together to try to figure out really how we move the needle in this space using virtual reality as a new, very powerful and fun tool and a new approach to therapy that could only help in therapy sessions is what our theory was. And I think we did pretty well with our piloting last year in the early part of 2022. And then we basically strengthened our partnership going into the back half of 22 and then going into this year to where we're now actually co-developing some very exciting developments in VR, specifically around activities of daily living. And Kathleen will talk much more about those types of areas of overlap, but it's a really exciting place that the two companies are finding ourselves in here.
Well, that is super exciting. And Dr. Kathleen, many people may not think who've traditionally been working in senior living for years, when we think about rehabilitation and therapies in senior living, maybe technology is not the first thing that comes to mind. With you heading up so much of the education for your organization, why is this so important to you all, and why should this be so important and exciting for the senior living industry?
That's a great question. And I think technology needs to be at the forefront. I mean, if we look at where therapy is going, technology has this opportunity really to change the landscape of what we are doing in our clinics, what we are doing with our patients, with our residents. And, I'll echo what Chris said. We're working right now, we as a company have queried our clinicians, are the folks that we serve. What do you need? What are you looking for? And there are these opportunities utilizing virtual reality to immerse that senior in a situation, in an environment that maybe they couldn't be in before. So we're able to simulate things that they've never been able to simulate. Maybe they can't get out and go grocery shopping, but they can do that in a virtual reality world using technology as an adjunct. And it is absolutely a skilled component that we're delivering, and using that as an adjunct to traditional therapy. Our patients are engaged. They're excited. They're having a ton of fun utilizing it. So I think to ignore technology is certainly not the way to go. It is definitely the future of what we're doing in therapy.
Well, and that is so exciting. And I think, where our industry is, and as the population that we are beginning to serve, there's almost going to be an expectation of technology at the fingertips. One of the things I would like to talk with you all a little bit about is, if you look at the senior living industry, it's vast. There's a lot of different service and product types, a lot of different communities. If you look at the urban all the way out to the rural communities. And so often we talk about how we can improve quality to more people and have access. Can you tell me how not only your partnership together maybe be addressing some of those needs, but also kind of what's happening even from an industry perspective, maybe even legislatively, some initiatives that are happening to make this better and make the industry better?
Yeah, Josh, I could take a quick stab at that. We're at a really interesting point of inflection, I think, as it relates to VR and healthcare. We started this company, MyndVR, in 2016 with the idea that VR and senior healthcare could use a boost of energy around music and memory. So we thought, wow, immersive technology with recognizable melodies and music would be a wonderful way to provide relief in dementia state, for instance. What we have found over the 6 years now is that there are far more use cases for VR therapy over and above music therapy. So it's a vast area where we can see VR helping across this continuum of care in senior living. But also when we think about VR, we think about that emotional, that cognitive, and that physical well-being as a blend. And that's really what MyndVR stands for, is to try to recognize that this older life is very important and still has a lot to learn, still has a lot to engage with and fun. So we try to lift these seniors out of their four walls in these communities into what we call the fifth quadrant, where we can connect them and their consciousness with art, with music, with animals, with pets, things that relax. And now you start to take that portfolio and you start to, and that's kind of a nice to have to some extent, that type of content. It really works well with seniors. But now in 2022 and beyond, we're seeing MyndVR move from kind of a nice to have to a need to have in the flow of therapy. And so we're listening very loud to what Kathleen is saying here about, hey, here's where the technology could make a difference. Places that MyndVR would not have thought about. So one example I like to talk about is we developed this butterfly catching game. We take a senior, we put them in a very relaxing meadow. Digital butterflies are flying around. They're colored. There's a challenge in how fast and how you catch them. Well, Kathleen had the bright idea. Well, why don't we, move these butterflies up, down certain PNF patterns to help with shoulder rehab? Well, we wouldn't have thought of that. Kathleen brought that to our attention, and our teams were able to construct that and put that into the field. So now select therapists can use this technology.
Wow. So that's really exciting. So let's, something you said, and I think the way you phrased it, Chris, was VR is becoming something that was a kind of nice to have. If it's one of those wish list things to more of, hey, I need to have this. So as community leaders out there are beginning to think, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm just getting caught up from post-pandemic. We're getting our head above water. Wow, that sounds great. I probably do need to have this, but another program, what am I going to have to do? How am I going to have to manage that? Do I have the team to do that? Tell the listener, tell us what's the first step in this, and what does it look like to roll out a program, and where do you even start, and where is a good place to start? Is it in the activities and life enrichment program? Is it more on the clinical side? Is it a little bit of both? Where do you start with this program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really is, VR is really defining itself in specific areas in senior care where I think a massive amount of disruption will happen. So we can't think of VR just as an activity enhancer. We can't think of it just as a new tool for therapists. We can't think of it just as a training apparatus for the staff. or a wellness program for the staff. Often our operator staff caregivers are often burnout and long days. We think VR can help them a lot as well. So when you start to look at the overall ROI that VR can make in an operation, and that these operators can achieve, it gets pretty fascinating when you start adding these other things. And then you asked a question a minute ago about legislation. So MyndVR, we're driving a lot of the legislation that, as it relates to VR being accepted at the federal level. So there's an actual bipartisan act of Congress that we're supporting called the Access to Prescription Digital Therapeutics Act. And it's gaining a lot of steam. Both sides of the aisle have shown support. It's in the Senate committee now. And we're just really excited about this, because the federal government is really waking up to the power of VR therapy. When we start thinking about the future state of VR and we think about these headsets and having these immersive glasses essentially in every healthcare setting imaginable that a senior could touch, the amount of digital therapeutics that can be driven down the network to these headsets is really fascinating in terms of how fast that can grow. Our job is to make the interface very simple, easy to use, one button. So when Kathleen's therapists are out in the field, it's one button, turn it on, and they're into the application that is part of that person's care plan. And when we see that going from end to end, Josh, in terms of how a community is actually implementing this into the fabric of the operations, that's when it gets very exciting to me.
And just having seen this in our communities and implementing this in our communities, I want to echo what Chris is saying. If we're looking at this in silos, that's not the way to look at it. There is applicability of virtual reality across every aspect of senior care, senior living. So, for example, I can use this in assisted living or independent living, working on home safety modules that are built into there, various things, as Chris was mentioning, the PNS patterns, things for balance, things for, safety and to reduce falls. I can take it to my dementia unit where I have, this visuals, and then I can pair that with some sort of scent. So I have this multi-sensory type of engagement. I can bring it to my nursing staff and do training on those same types of things. I can bring it to activities, pair a few headsets together, and we do a travel log for people who used to love to travel. I can bring it into therapy. There's so much applicability to this. And you asked the question, how do you get it started? How do you get it set up? I will tell you what's worked for us the best, and this is so simple, but put on a headset. Put on a headset, turn it on, look at the programs, and then just think, wow, what could I do with this? And the opportunities are endless, and people get so excited. I mean, Chris mentioned the butterfly game. There's dogs, there's hiking. I mean, you name it. There's all sorts of stuff built into there, and they get really excited and think, oh, so-and-so could use this, so-and-so could use that, and it just morphs from there to find that applicability. So it's not as challenging as one might think. It really is, brimming with excitement.
Now, also, one of the things, and, this probably shows my ignorance on where technology has far advanced, even to my understanding, and being able to keep up with how fast technology is changing and advancing. But I have often thought as the virtual reality as being kind of single person and individual experience, but my understanding is now that this can be more of a multi-person group experience endeavor. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So a lot of some of the hype in the VR space is certainly about multi-user 360 3D worlds where people can go and interact, largely being driven by Meta for teenagers as a playground to socialize. When it comes to seniors, we have to think about a couple of things. Number one, older adults, they adopted everything from FM radio to color TV to personal computers to the internet to social media to smartphones. The one thing they didn't adopt along the way were Atari video games that our generation might have played a lot of. So this whole idea of video game graphics and CGI and things like that, we have to be very, very thoughtful, let's put it that way, about how we implement technologies along those lines. Is the power of virtual reality, the gaming engine, allowing us to connect grandma or grandpa in the private metaverse that we're creating for that community with an outside family member that's 2,000 miles away? The answer is absolutely yes. This is where it gets really exciting. And when you think about social isolation, which is one of the things we try to combat with this technology, and you think about connecting, younger family members who are pretty up on VR in general, because it's kind of swept our culture. But now there's a way they can participate with their elders in VR. I mean, this is an exceptional way to inspire, I think, the whole generation of intergenerational communication, essentially. Yeah. You have much more to talk about when that granddaughter can go virtually to the Grand Canyon with her grandfather. That's infinitely more material in the first 10 seconds to talk about than generally what gets talked about in some of these demotivating family visitation times.
Well, and Chris, you are so right in that if there was a silver lining to the pandemic, this may have been it. Because we saw when families came together and did that, we weren't sitting there saying, oh, what did you have for lunch? And how did you sleep last night? And then the conversation just stagnates. We got together, and those individuals who were utilizing this platform, these types of platforms, we didn't see that social isolation, that depression, that all of those severe effects that we saw with the pandemic. They were still able to connect, and that social connection was so important.
Chris, you mentioned earlier your team and your partnership, one of your big focuses, and you're putting a lot of energy and effort into legislative actions and bills. Is the goal there primarily to help affordability, access? What is really the initiative there that you're really trying to help with?
Well, yeah, there are a couple of different things. I would say access is probably most important. When you look at, we were just recently approved as the first supplemental covered benefit by a Medicare Advantage plan. It's pretty groundbreaking when you think about those things, because VR has now moved in 6 years from an idea for senior care to now being attached to a Medicare Advantage plan, where it is a covered benefit by AgeWell of New York. First of many, obviously, in this area. But the great thing is that, again, based on our advocacy efforts at the federal level, we're starting to see a thawing of acceptance as VR is a tool that we think can scale very fast and easy. So when we think about software as this sort of future state of a digital pill, and we're prescribing these digital treatments, right? They ride down over the MyndVR network, and they're administered by the care staff, therapists, the nurses, all the folks that are involved in this senior's life, can be administered by those folks. So, it really turns the paradigm upside down in terms of scaling treatments with software. And I think that's really a big, opportunity for the senior living industry to grab onto, because when you just look at the sheer population shift and what's happening and what's going to strain our resources, not just in communities, but at home as well, I think VR is going to be a heck of a tool to help with that.
Wow. So VR, as we've kind of summarized, has gone from a nice to have to a need to have. And I know our listeners' ears are perking up. And, my co-host and co-founder, Lucas, is not with us today, but I know he can remember, and our producer, Sarah, about 6 years ago, which I think that's kind of one of the date benchmarks that you pointed to here today. 6 years ago, I can remember us traveling to the Thrive Center in Louisville, Kentucky, and putting on for the first time these ginormous headset goggles, and them telling us, hey, VR is the future. And us kind of just, actually, I got dizzy putting the first one on. I had to sit down, and we didn't really know at that time, well, how could this apply to senior living? We were just kind of guessing, and it's gone from the future to the now. And through y'all's partnership making that happen, I know our listeners who aren't already on board with looking and evaluating how VR is going to shape their communities, they will be after today. Thank you all for joining us so much. Thank you all for partnering with Bridge the Gap to help bring content and innovation to the senior living industry and to our listeners, wherever they may be listening to this podcast. So can't thank you all enough for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, we are going to link all of your information so that our listeners can direct connect after listening to this podcast. It'll be in our show notes. Connect with us. And as you see this episode and all the posts go out online, I hope all of our listeners will engage with Chris and Kathleen and their thought leadership. I hope everyone has enjoyed another great episode of Bridge the Gap.
Thanks for listening to Bridge the Gap podcast with Josh and Lucas. Connect with the BTG Network team and use your voice to influence the industry by connecting with us at btgvoice.com.